Good morning, Standard Telephone. May I help you? Hold just a minute. I'll connect you to that extension.
Oh, for the good old days. A time when life was easy going. With advances made in the postal department and the widespread use of the automobile, this technique of mailing letters is no longer the most convenient way. Today, we simply drive to a nearby post office or mailbox and drop off our mail. Our dependence upon the telephone has grown tremendously. We no longer need to run to the local store to make or receive a call. New technology has allowed us access to the telephone almost anywhere. And with cellular service, the telephone is always available for the busy person on the go. The all-day wash day of a few years ago meant drawing water from a well or carrying it from a spring. Today's wash day is very different. By pushing a few buttons and turning a few knobs, the modern wash day is complete. The wood cook stove was not only a means for preparing food, but also a means for heating the home. This dual purpose of the wood cook stove was quite advantageous in the fall and winter months, but not so pleasant in the spring and summer. For this oven, there is no need to chunk in wood. Use microwaves. Just a few years ago, could one have believed that radio waves would be used to cook, and that it would only take seconds for the food to go from the refrigerator to the table? Many of our grandparents and great-grandparents performed this chore daily. The milk was stored in the spring or the well house, where it could be kept only for a day or so. Today, we simply drive to the store and pick up a container of milk, which will stay fresh much longer. When the mule was used for working the fields, it was considered to be earning its keep. Although in the winter the mule's usefulness was limited, it still must be fed and sheltered. Modern-day tractors have relieved the mule and the farmer of much toil and calluses. Prior to the convenience of electricity, the oil lamp was the major item used for lighting the home. Could the person carrying the old oil lamp ever have dreamed of such a spectacular light display? We now have the ability to light up the night as if it were day. No longer is it necessary to limit our activities to the daylight hours. With the old teletype, a message from across the state could be received in just minutes. With a fax machine, you can receive a letter from halfway around the world in just seconds. Early phone service had only one conductor wire running to the home. This wire was connected to the side of the telephone box. An iron rod was driven into the ground near the house, and a wire was attached from this rod to the other side of the telephone box. The earth was used as a return path back to the telephone office. In dry weather, the return path was poor, and so was the phone service. By pouring water around the ground rod, the repairman could improve the service. Later, two conductor wires were run to the customer's home, greatly improving the service. The telephone lines in this picture could carry about 50 calls. With this fiber optic cable and its associated equipment, the capacity can be greater than 50,000 calls at one time. With the introduction of fiber optic cable to the communication industry came the opportunity to combine the services that are presently being sent to the customer's home on several lines onto just one line. The move from mule power to horsepower has been a welcomed change, not only for the mule, but also for those who install the outside service lines. When Standard Telephone Company purchased its first XY equipment early in 1956, it was quickly placed into service and was looked upon as the ultimate in telephone equipment. Now with the new digital switches, Standard is again looked upon as having the ultimate in switching. Also, with the installation of the digital switch in the Cleveland office, long-distance calls can be carried for other telephone companies. Standard Telephone Company traces its beginning to the early days of the 20th century, when Marler C. York of Clarksville, Georgia, purchased two telephone instruments, a coil of wire and some insulators. One of the telephones was installed in his home, and the other in a general store operated by him and his uncle. The two telephones were connected with a wire which was strung on poles and trees between the two establishments. Recognizing its convenience and time-saving value, Mr. York's neighbors sought his permission to purchase their own telephones and attach them to his line. After some study and planning, Mr. York and others using the system organized the Standard Telephone Company. A small switchboard was purchased and installed in the rear of the general store. Standard Telephone Company was in business, with 28 telephones in service. The company installed a local telephone system in the town of Cornelia, Georgia. And shortly thereafter, trunk lines were installed connecting the residents of the two communities. Standard was the first telephone company in the state of Georgia to provide extended area telephone service. The earlier telephone rate for local service was $1.25 a month. At the time of purchase, 1939, the rate for one-party service was $2 a month. No record is available for the number of customers prior to 1939 when Mr. Stewart acquired the company, although we do know there were 153 telephones in Clarksville and 266 in Cornelia.
About nightfall on Christmas Eve, 1945, a heavy, wet snow began falling on Habersham County. Within a couple of hours, wires, limbs, and even poles began to give way and break. By midnight, the storm had pretty well subsided.
This is the first private branch exchange. It was installed in 1946 at the Johnson & Johnson Company located in Cornelia. Here is a modern PBX in service at the headquarters building of Standard Telephone Company.
Ruby and I remember very well what life was like in 1947. Men's trousers were baggy and pleated, and double-breasted jackets were the rage. Well, that's like it is in 1994. But one thing that has changed is the way that we switch telephone calls. This is a switchboard that was used back in 1947 in Cornelia. All of the wires from all over the city came into one location, one central location that was known as Central. And when somebody on a line wanted to make a telephone call, they would pick up the receiver from their wall-hung telephone, turn a crank on the side that would send an electrical current through the line, and that would cause one of these positions right here to operate. This piece of metal would drop down, and consequently it was called a drop. Ruby would plug into that position to find out the number that the calling party wanted and would say, "Number, please." The person on the other end would say 65R2. Well, that means they wanted to speak to the person who was on line number 65, and that could be a party line with several people on there, and Ruby would ring the line twice. R2. And that then would make the connection with the person on the other end.
That number is 706.
Well, as you can see, many changes have taken place in the way that we switch telephone calls today. But even with push-button telephones and with computerized switching, we still require an operator to handle those calls that are not easily processed automatically. Betty handles calls that relate to long-distance information, such as credit card, collect calls. She also receives trouble reports here, and she's able to use this computerized equipment to quickly handle any customer calls as they come in. And it's a far cry from the way things were back in 1947 when we did not have these beautiful air-conditioned surroundings.
In 1994, customers totaled more than 50,000. Quite an accomplishment for a little project started by a general store operator and a few of his friends, wouldn't you say? You know, we're living in the good old days now. The activities of Standard's operations have changed drastically over the past years. Standard Telephone Company is presently supplying the medium used by Habersham Central High School in its distance interactive learning classes.
Standard Telephone Company has been very active with USTA for many, many years. This organization started nearly 100 years ago to represent the interests of independent, that is, non-Bell telephone companies. Much of its early activity, as a matter of fact, had to do with how the Bell companies and independent companies settled toll revenues. In 1984, with the breakup of AT&T, the Bell companies themselves became independent and were asked to join then the United States Independent Telephone Association. They all did, and with their addition, the name was changed to the United States Telephone Association. And I'm sure with all of the things that are taking place today, we will have an active role within USTA for many years to come.
The Independent Telephone Pioneer Association at Standard Telephone Company works to help make life better for the citizens in our area. Authorship is not a requirement for employment at Standard Telephone Company, although for Carolyn Stewart, it was used greatly to assist Mr. Stewart Sr. in the writing of his book, A Vivid and Compelling Dream, as well as the writing of her own book, Arms Across Georgia.
Standard Telephone Company was once in the cable business and then was asked by the federal government to remove themselves from the business, and this all happened in the 70s. Standard at that time had built the system that currently operates in the city of Cornelia. We have always felt that in our effort to deliver a quality product to rural Georgia, we needed to have the opportunity to provide both telecommunications and television service on a medium at a price the customer could afford, and I think those are two critical elements as we look at where we are today. We are now re-entering the cable TV business where we can, and we're doing it in such a fashion as to use our facilities jointly where we know that we can deliver a quality product to the customer at a very affordable price.
For 90 eventful years, from the turn of the century to the space age, Standard Telephone has provided the latest in telecommunications technology to our customers, providing more and better service than anyone dreamed of 90 years ago. Standard Telephone Company, your connection from the past to the future.